WPSU is your source for Penn State sports, Penn State research, Penn State community. But we can't do it without your support. Make a contribution today and get a DVD of your favorite Penn State show.
Presentation of To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU is made possible in part by support from the Penn State Alumni Association, informing, involving, and inspiring Penn State alumni and students through its publications, programs, and events. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. And from the members of WPSU.
From the studios of Penn State Public Broadcasting, this is To the Best of My Knowledge. Good evening, I'm Graham Spanier, and our topic tonight is childhood obesity. Over the past 30 years, childhood obesity has doubled for preschool children and adolescents, and has tripled for children between the ages of 6 and 11. In fact, obesity is now the #1 health threat facing American kids. How can parents help kids slim down or prevent them from becoming overweight? Tonight we'll talk about the causes, prevention, and treatment of childhood obesity. We'll also take your phone calls at 1-800-543-8242. You can also reach us at response@psu.edu. Now let's meet our guests. Dr. Ron Williams is the director of the Penn State Children's Hospital Multidisciplinary Weight Loss Program. Jennifer Savage Williams is the Associate Director of Penn State Center for Childhood Obesity Research. Thank you both for joining us on our program tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Williams, let me begin by asking you what constitutes an overweight child, and how do we distinguish overweight from obese?
For children, we use a percentile of BMI, which is body mass index, which puts your height into proportion with your weight. So a weight number by itself doesn't mean much until you put your height in there with it. And overweight is defined as having a BMI greater than the 85th percentile compared to other children their same age and sex. And obesity is defined as having a BMI of greater than 95th percentile.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure that there are people out there right away wondering, what can I do if I have a young child to help head this off? What tips could you give us right at the beginning of the show, Jennifer, about how to prevent obesity in the first place?
I think some of the first and foremost would be to have fruits and vegetables in the home, obviously. The diet's very important, and the foods that you bring into your home are the foods that children are going to be exposed to. So having nutrient-dense foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, limiting television viewing would be very important also. The current guideline for the American Academy of Pediatrics is to limit television viewing to less than 2 hours. And among infants, birth to 1 is actually no television viewing. And also to get physically active. It's important to be physically active. The recommendation now is to be active 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day.
So is the idea of not watching television because therefore then they'll get exercise, or is it because they're going to be eating bad stuff while they're watching television?
I think it goes hand in hand. There is this give and take between being physically active versus sedentary behavior, but you can be both. You can watch television and be active. Sedentary behavior comes in play because it does take away from potential time to be active. And in addition, there are commercials, for example. I think I read at one point that in 1 year a child is exposed to 10,000 commercials, mostly geared towards high-fat, high-sugar food items, which can lead them to request those type of foods when they're shopping with mom.
So Ron, what's the scope of this problem in America today?
Well, there's a huge scope. Right now, there's about 30% of children are obese or overweight in the country. In Pennsylvania, it's 31%. And right now, the percentage that are obese is larger than the percent that is overweight. So we're getting into a larger population of children. And this goes all the way through. And looking at the data from last year, from kindergarten through 6th grade, those are the numbers I just gave you for the entire state of Pennsylvania. And there are some states that are higher and some states that are lower. So it's becoming an increasing problem, and it's rising about 1% per year in Pennsylvania, so it still hasn't peaked yet.
Which is important because an overweight child or an overweight infant is more likely to be overweight as an adolescent and as an adult, which has a lot of cost in terms of the health care right now.
Sure. The statistics out there that if you're a preschooler and you're overweight or obese, there's a 33% chance that you're going to be an overweight adult. Once you're in the school, it's about a 50% chance, and once you're a teenager, it's an 80% chance you're going to be an obese adult and then have all the medical problems that come along with that. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, etc., at a much higher risk. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same through all races. The black race and Hispanic races have higher percentage of high blood pressure and diabetes. So you have to be even more cautious with those backgrounds.
I think we're all familiar with cases of children that are really big and chubby, and then within a couple of years they're skinny, or skinny babies that get really big, or people that go through cycles throughout their whole childhood. How do you explain that?
Well, I think there is a period of time in which an infant before they begin crawling tends to get a little heavier, and then when they start crawling, you often see some weight come off. But generally speaking, an overweight infant or toddler is still more likely to be overweight as an adolescent or in early adulthood too.
Mm-hmm. Right, so the baby fat should pretty much be off by about 3 to 4 years of age. Mm-hmm. Once you're past that, it's no longer baby fat. That's now putting you at risk for all the things we just mentioned.
I think the most common thing we all want to do when a baby's crying is feed the baby. That often gets them to stop, and you wonder, are you feeding them too much? Are you heading them down a path of obesity? What kind of guidance can you give people?
I think at one point I read that among infants, 1 to 3 months, they cry on average 3 hours. So that is a lot of crying, and in not all cases is it due to them actually being hungry. Sometimes they just want to be comforted, or they are maybe fussy, or they could be teething, or there are a lot of different instances that maybe the first response shouldn't always be to either put them to breast or to give them a bottle. Mm-hmm. And it's like learning to identify those cues, those hunger cues.
What about genetics? There are people who would say it runs in the family, or there's something in the constitution of this person, or their metabolism is different. How do you weigh the environmental, the household, the effects, the habits of the family, the foods chosen, versus some individuals that maybe do it all right and are still putting on weight?
Well, you hit it. All of those things contribute to obesity, and each one of those can be a separate factor. Certainly genes do play a role. There are families that are overweight, and a lot of that has to go to the metabolism. You take 2 people, give them the same amount of activity and food, they may weigh very different. That's because how quickly or not quickly we burn the calories that we eat. And the slower metabolism ones are the ones you really have to have them work harder at keeping their weight stable.
Mm-hmm.
I think another point is, as you mentioned earlier, over the past 3 decades, the rates have increased proportionally, but I think it's pretty safe to say that our genetics are not changing.
Right,
so there are definitely some environmental influences that are at play there, as opposed to just genetics.
If you're just joining us, I'm Graham Spanier, president of Penn State, and this is To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU, Penn State Public Broadcasting. We're also being broadcast on the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our topic tonight is childhood obesity with guest Dr. Ron Williams, director of Penn State Children's Hospital Multidisciplinary Weight Loss Program, and Jennifer Savage Williams, associate director of Penn State Center for Childhood Obesity Research. You can join our conversation by calling us at 1-800-543-8242 or email us at response@psu.edu. Let's talk for a minute about picky eaters. A lot of parents say, oh, my child's a picky eater. Right. Is there such a thing, and how does that contribute to this problem here?
I think many moms would tell you that when their baby becomes a toddler, that there is a phase where they may potentially be a picky eater. And if your child is a picky eater, it's important to remember that it does take several exposures to a different food before a child may potentially accept it. There's been evidence to show that it can take up to 15 exposures, 10 to 15 times of receiving one particular item before that baby may accept it. Babies are innately born with a preference for sweet and salty foods, so vegetables, which have a bitter flavor, it can be more challenging to get them to accept them. So it's important to remember to be persistent, to try and to give those foods repeatedly, maybe not to try it every day, but to space out the times in which you're going to be offering those foods. And you know, you might be able to try different dips or flavors or spices or things like that with the fruits or vegetables, for example, to get them to try new foods. And modeling is very important. So if mom and dad or sibling is, you know, saying no to the vegetables, it's much more likely that the youngest sibling that you might be trying, or baby that you're trying to get to try new foods, won't be so inclined. Mm-hmm. So,
Ron, talk to us about the complications of obesity. What are some of the things that happen when a child or an adolescent gets into that situation?
Potentially almost every system can be affected, but the major ones that we see in my weight loss clinic that we have, up to 30% of the kids and teens that are coming to see me have elevated blood pressures at their first or second visit. They can have high cholesterols, they can be insulin resistant, which means that the insulin they have isn't working well and they have to produce more of it, and those are sort of the building blocks for high blood pressure and diabetes. Diabetes is also a complication. As their weight goes up, they can have problems with their knees and get some arthritis there, or Blount's disease, which is very bad bow legs. They can have sleep apnea, where they stop breathing at night while they're sleeping, the same type of sleep apnea that adults have who are overweight. And I've seen that as young as age 3 or 4 in some of the children that I've seen. You can have a little bit with the immune system, just pretty much everywhere, but those main ones are the cardiovascular ones, the heart side effects, and the diabetes are the two ones that most of us are seeing and looking to try and prevent and stave off because they have significant consequences.
How about the social and emotional consequences of an obese child? I remember from my childhood that there were a couple of kids in our class who were overweight, and they got picked on. They weren't very popular. In retrospect, you know, it must have been tough for them.
It hasn't changed. It's still a lot of obese children have the same types of problems, and a number of them come in and have been picked on and have low self-esteem. Some are depressed. So it is a very difficult thing. Society pretty much still shuns it. They've done independent studies that show that, you know, women who are obese have lower socioeconomic status as they grow up, lower salaries, and less chance of getting married, independent of intellect or background. So society places a number of negative connotations on obesity. And it's tougher now that many more are coming up and that there's still that stereotype in there.
Mm-hmm. We're going to open up our phone lines now and take our first caller. It's Evelyn calling from Phillipsburg. Hello, Evelyn. You're on the air.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. I wanted to make a comment that during the holidays, I was getting ready to plan some meals, and I decided that I would maybe dig around and find some of my mother's old china to serve. And I was shocked at how small the plates were small, the dessert dishes were small, and it was just a real graphic evidence of how portion sizes have changed and how much we eat now, and as opposed to when I was growing up. I'm in my 50s, so I'm talking some 40, 45 years ago, but I'm curious to know how did we evolve into a group of people who eat more and more and more? Thank you.
I think it's a great question. You know, we were just having the same discussion in the Penn State President's residence recently. One of my predecessors was Milton Eisenhower, and he was the president of Penn State in the 50s. At the same time, his brother was president of the U.S. So he had the Eisenhower China. It's still there at the Penn State president's residence, and the plates are so much smaller than we're accustomed to now, what, more than 50 years later. Right. And you go in, you can go out for breakfast and you get these slam dunk type breakfasts, and it's amazing how much food is being presented as a normal meal.
Well, I think over there are studies that show that portions have more than, some depending on the item, have more than doubled over the past 20, 30 years. And specifically with kids, there have been a couple studies that show that as portions increase, kids actually consume more. For example, there was one study that they served the appropriate size and then they doubled it, and kids actually ate 25% more calories when the serving was larger. So there's that tendency to overeat and to consume more than they would consume otherwise. And it's the same that's demonstrated with adults. So among younger children, 2 to 3, we don't see that. They have the ability to self-regulate. We're guessing, or we found that 2 to 3-year-olds are able to self-regulate when they're served the different size portions. They actually eat a constant amount, whereas as the children get older, the 5-year-old kids, they become more similar to the adults, and as the portion increases, they actually consume more. The interesting thing is, in that study, they despite serving a large portion, they were allowed to then self-serve them. They were allowed to serve themselves from the dish. And when they served themselves, despite it being a large portion, they ate the appropriate amount as if they had been served the smaller portion. So it suggests maybe we should be allowing kids to serve themselves, and we should be serving more age-appropriate portions.
Ron?
Well, if you go to a restaurant, many of us go to a restaurant that serves us more food, and we don't go back to the ones that don't, unless you're getting the portion size that you've done. So it's sort of a spiraling circle in that. And in America, I think we do have the I see it, therefore I eat it diet. Many of us will fill the plate and finish it all. Even when there's only 2 or 3 bites left, and you're there, you're going to finish those off rather than leave it. Right. So a lot of us have turned on our eyes and off our stomach, and we've pretty much turned off our satiety mechanisms. And I agree, the young children, they eat a balanced diet over a month, not over each particular meal. So they know what they need, and I think we sort of take our things and the modeling there, and we sort of corrupt the kids and have learned the wrong behaviors and have a hard time getting ourselves back to appropriate portion sizes.
So is this a part of your program when families come in? Is it something that you emphasize in the,
most definitely.
In the treatment?
Portion control is the first thing that we start to do. When they come in, we try to decrease their portion size by about 15% on the first visit, and then slowly crank it down a little bit more over the next 2 or 3, and also cut down some of the sugary drinks, which is another big one, especially for the younger children. I mean, now when you go out to get a drink at a fast food place or even a restaurant, you're getting these huge glasses, you know, a quart, whereas before you used to get 8 ounces, and nobody leaves the drink to throw away. So when you talk about sodas that are having about 100 calories in 8 ounce, you're getting a significant amount of calories with that drink without even chewing.
What about diet drinks? Are they okay?
Diet drinks are good. They certainly have no calories. There is some research out there that is suggesting that when we drink a diet drink, it's very sweet and it turns on something in the brain expecting to have calories. And if none that follow, it may make you hungrier later. I haven't seen that too much in my weight loss program, but we certainly have lost a lot of weight by changing them to the diet drinks. If you're looking at a low-calorie drink, water is the best. It is the best for your body. It has no calories. It's the cheapest. Hands down, it's the #1 we recommend. When you want taste, then you're talking about some chemicals.
I think Dr. Williams brings a good point up. In terms of the types of foods that kids are actually consuming, there was a national study that was put out that looked at what types of foods and the nutritional value of what 4 to 24-month-old infants and toddlers were consuming, and remarkably, only a quarter to a third were consuming fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. French fries were the most common vegetable by 15 months. And I think around 45% of children had already consumed carbonated sweetened beverages. So the diet early on suggests that, you know, the intervention needs to be targeting these very young infants and toddlers before they, you know, develop obesity, especially with in the upwards of 20% being overweight, even at 2 to 5, 2 to 5 years of age, it really suggests that prevention is important and key, and targeting that early birth to 5 might be critical.
Plus, milk and soda have reversed themselves over the last 20 years. It used to be you drink 2 or 3 glasses of milk a day and maybe a little bit of soda. Now it's the other way around, 2 or 3 glasses of soda a day and maybe a little bit of milk.
You know, we didn't have a lot when I was growing up, but food was the one way in which, in my family circle, you showed affection, you lavished something nice on your family. And we do have a stereotypic view that certain kinds of families, like Italian families or Jewish families, it's all about the food. Do you find in your treatment of children who come in with childhood obesity problems that there's very much something a part of the family tradition, that maybe it's not so much that they don't know what's good for you and what's bad for you, but that food is just used as a reinforcement for certain things?
Certainly. Food is still done that very way right now. That hasn't changed much. What has changed is the amount of activity that we're doing to balance those calories we're eating has changed over the years. I think that's the biggest one. As we mentioned with the TV earlier, some studies have shown that your metabolic rate, how quickly you burn calories, significantly decreases when you watch the television. In fact, you burn more calories sleeping than when watching TV. So you may as well take a nap instead of doing that. Some studies in adults have shown that the more interesting the program, the less calories you burn. So again, it has to do with a balance of activity here. TV is fine as long as you keep it in perspective, and so is food. You can have any food out there you want as long as you eat it in moderation. Junk food fits into the diets as well, as long as you have some of it and not all the time, and keep your portions and snacks down to an appropriate amount. We limit them to 100 calories. Doesn't matter if it's cheesecake or if it's fruit. 100 calories for a snack will help keep you in line so that you really don't get into trouble over the long haul.
He brings up a good point. A lot of parents who have overweight children, I'm guessing, are concerned and trying to restrict their intake of certain types of foods, and it's kind of counterintuitive to what you would expect. In cases where parents are actually restricting the intake of highly palatable foods, it only makes those foods more desirable. So it is important to not totally, ban it as a no item. No, you can't have this. It's not allowed type of thing, because it just makes them want it more. So having it in the home for special occasions, for example, or to snack on every once in a while in moderation is okay. It just can't be a daily habit to be eating those highly palatable junk type foods.
And I think we have the impression, some people I'm sure have the impression, that if that you have children and adolescents who don't want to be obese, they don't want to be, and they believe that they're controlling their food intake, they believe they're doing all the right things, and they're still putting on weight. And it's easy to look at that with skepticism and say, well, it can't be so. But is it so sometimes?
It can be, and again, it all gets down to how quickly you burn calories. If you burn them very slow, whatever you eat stays around for a long time. And simplistically put, I tell my patients, your body's a bank. Every day you make energy deposits when you eat, and energy withdrawals when you move around. Whatever happens at the end of the day is what happens to you. So if we've eaten more calories or more energy than we've used over time, the body stores it just like a bank. And in order to balance it, you've got to have a good balance, and to lose weight, you have to do the opposite, use more energy than you eat. And that's very difficult. Even though some children are eating a small amount, that still may be too much for their daily needs, and they need to put their portion sizes lower, or choose foods that have lower energy density so they can eat more but still have less energy that they're depositing.
And I think he brings a good point. Sometimes it's the case where you need to eat, maybe eat less than you, not just less than you want, but less than you need. And those might be two different things.
Yeah.
Because they might be eating less than they would want to eat and think they should be losing weight, but it's not actually less than they need to eat.
And it's tough because in some families we have one child that's underweight and another one that's overweight. And getting them to eat what's right for each of those children is a very different thing and difficult, because a lot of times we all think of more food as you love me more, getting into some of the things that, that you had mentioned as well.
Yeah. Let's take another call now. Lee is on the line, calling from State College. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my call. With all the families and you know, there are a lot of people who are suffering with and fighting against being overweight. I was wondering what the role of schools would be to educate kids and, you know, help them out in eating right or working on their weight.
Well, schools teach nutrition, don't they? And now you've said that it's very common in the schools to do BMI measurements.
Right, in Pennsylvania, the schools are now mandated to report the BMIs on all children from kindergarten.
It's a requirement.
From kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. They'll give you their height, their weight, their BMI, and sort of classify it for you in a letter that comes home, whether they're underweight, normal weight, overweight, or obese. And some of the schools are significantly lacking in nutrition education, and that's something that we can certainly help improve on. There is an organization out there that's through Penn State, the Center for Nutrition and Activity Promotion, otherwise known as the Pennsylvania Advocates for Nutrition and Activity, that help provide school nurses with tools to help the children learn a little bit more about eating right and moving more. They have their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 program that they've put into play that helps them get 1 hour of physical activity, less than 2 hours of TV, and 5 or more fruits and vegetables, 3 meals a day, and then having 4 or more glasses of low or no calorie beverages. Help working them to eat a healthier lifestyle for all the children to be in the normal weight range.
Lee, are you still on the line there with us?
Yes, I am.
Are you affiliated with a school in some way?
No, I'm just. I have had a daughter that went through the school district, and I know that you know, there were times when we were learning what she was eating during the day, especially at lunchtimes. You know, her nutrition intake wasn't wonderful, and it had been a struggle. And I was just wondering whether anything has changed since that she was in.
Well, the National School Lunch Program has to meet certain guidelines. So the food that's offered by the school lunch, which then they can get reimbursed for low-income families, must meet certain guidelines. There is a challenge, though, that there are a la carte options, there are vending machine options, there are school store options. There's often school fundraisers going on that are selling, you know, different chocolates, candies, cookies, you know, lollipops, all that kind of thing. So there are certain policy level things that are in place, but then there is still a challenge within the schools of getting the food items to be the most healthiest options while also promoting physical activity.
And a lot of the schools now don't have physical education every day. They're on an every other day system. And that's tougher too, because then they don't get that 1 hour of physical activity in the school, and many times when they come home, they're sitting on the sofa, very sedentary. So it's also tough to get them up and walking in the home.
Lee, thanks for your call. Our next caller is Bob, who is on the line from Morrisdale. Good evening, Bob.
Good evening. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I would like to make the point about exercise. My daughter, when she was in elementary school, used to come home and gleefully tell us about stories about boys who got in trouble, and sometimes girls, and their recess was taken away because they were misbehaving in class. Now, I do believe that there should be consequences for inappropriate conduct, but at the same time, they only get 1 short recess per day. And I remember when I was in school, we used to get 2 long recesses. And my mother still talks about how I used to tear the knees out of my pants at recess because we played hard and got a lot of exercise.
Yeah.
And so what I'm wondering is whether we're actually punishing students and children when they actually, we're teaching them to ignore their own restlessness. I believe that restlessness is a hunger for exercise, that nature ensures not only that young children and young animals get the adequate nutrition they need by giving them a hunger for food, but that it also gives young animals a hunger for exercise, and we call that restlessness. And that's why young animals are so fun to watch, of all species, because they tumble and they jump and they pounce. And when we punish children for acting out those behaviors, you know, or deny them recess, I'm afraid that we're actually punishing what are healthy behaviors. I'll stop now.
Well, it would be a different world if the kids were so eager for English and math. We said, we're going to take away your English class if you goof off. What about that, taking away recess? And I don't have a good sense for how much of recess there is in schools right now.
Well, not to put everything on the school system, but just to defend them, they do need activity at school, but then again, there should be activity at home. So even if you don't get the 20 minutes or 30 minutes of school recess, you need to provide activity for them at home to at least get into that much time there. So if we get punished one day or another one here and there, in the overall scheme of things will make a difference. But if we don't have activity set at the home place, then we're really going to get into trouble.
Yeah, good point. What about weight loss versus weight maintenance? You know, I think about kids are growing up and they're getting bigger and growing all the time. Do you necessarily want to get a kid to lose weight, or just to kind of stay where they are and then, you know, grow into that weight? What are the trade-offs there?
It depends what your weight is and whether or not you have medical problems. For a lot of my kids that are not over final adult weight yet, we talk about weight stabilization unless they have some significant medical problems, like they have elevated blood pressure or cholesterol, etc. Then we'll try and get some weight loss to get those medical problems under control. And then we'll talk about weight stabilization and let them grow into their weight.
And what should be included in a weight loss program for overweight children and their parents? What are the kinds of foods that you recommend in terms of liquids, foods, snacks? Give us
I can tell you what we do in our program. The first thing is you've got to get the parents involved. When one person does it, it's punishment. When a parent does it with you, it's a whole new way of life and takes a huge psychological pressure off the child. Plus the old do as I say, not as I do never works. So by getting the parent involved, they'll also have some modeling of behavior there. So we talk about having low or no calorie drinks for most of the drinks, reducing the portion sizes slowly, but we have to get there. Trying to eat healthier. Fruits and vegetables, cooking healthier so that you broil or grill your meats so that you're not having the fat with them. And then, of course, getting some exercise program started. Even if it's just a few minutes a day, doing it every day and slowly increasing it is a way to help balance that energy.
And all those are key points that would also be involved with if you have a healthy weight child in terms of preventing obesity also.
Now, one of our colleagues, Barbara Rolls, has written about volumetrics and
Jenny Craig.
Yeah. Does the same thing apply to children, where you want food with lots of volume and liquids and so on, fill them up but without necessarily as many calories as you would get from certain other kinds of foods?
Right. Barbara Rolls and Liam Birch have done several studies looking at both portion size and energy density, and they do see the same patterns that they see in the adults, that children will eat more when they're served a higher energy dense meal as opposed to a lower energy dense meal in terms of and consume a more calories in addition when they're consuming the higher energy dense meal. So the same principles do apply for children.
If you're just joining us, I'm Graham Spanier, president of Penn State, and this is To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU, Penn State Public Broadcasting, and the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our topic tonight is childhood obesity with guest Dr. Ron Williams, director of Penn State Children's Hospital Multidisciplinary Weight Loss Program, and Jennifer Savage Williams is associate director of Penn State Center for Childhood Obesity Research. You can join the conversation. Call us at 1-800-543-8242 or email us at response@psu.edu. Could you tell us a little bit more about the body mass index and how it's measured, and can you translate it into common terms? I mean, it's one thing to hear a number, but what does it actually mean? What's being measured, and what does it tell you about your body?
Well, the body mass index basically takes your height and your weight into consideration. So you need to have your height and weight measured. And the way I explain it to my parents is, if we had two people, each of them weighed 100 pounds, one was a 7-foot-tall basketball player, and the other was a baby, that 100 pounds would mean something very different for both of those people. For the 7-foot-tall basketball player, they'd be incredibly underweight. And that baby we could pretty much roll down the hallway would be very overweight. So it's not the number that makes a difference, it's how you take that weight into consideration for their height. And that's what BMI does. Now, BMI is a screening tool. If you took Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was Mr. Universe, he would be obese by the BMI. But his BMI wouldn't be so high because of fat, it's because of muscle. He had muscles on muscles. So it's a screening tool that we use to say, are we at risk? Are we overweight or obese here? And are we at risk for all those medical problems we talked about earlier?
And is there something you measure on the body physically, other than weight and height, that gives you a sense of where?
That's it.
Where you are.
And then basically what they do is they compared it to normal children. So if we take a boy who's 7 years old and he's got a BMI of 85, that means his BMI is higher than 85 other boys his age that would be compared to the normal. Now, if you do any of these things, someone has to fall low and someone has to fall high when you're doing it out of 100. But so the normal is from that 15th percentile to the 85th percentile is in the normal range. On the one end that's too low, on the other end that's too high. That's where we say we've got some issues that need to be further addressed.
Let's take a call from Gary. Gary's on the line with us from State College. Hi, Gary.
No, my name is Jerry.
Oh, Jerry, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question about an article in this morning's Center Daily Times. It was about a Penn State panel that's been addressing dangerous trans fats that are contained in the foods we eat. I understand that research is now recognizing the huge influence that our environment has in contributing to the obesity problem. I know that some have referred to the environment as being toxic, and others have called it obesogenic. This morning in the panel that was led by the Penn State Center for Food Innovation, the leadership had suggested that it was not necessary to ban trans fats as they've done in New York City, but rather just to encourage public awareness. Dr. Spanier, I'd like you to speak to this because I'm concerned that perhaps the Center for Food Innovation is funded by the food industry, which may have a vested interest in this issue.
Well, Jennifer, maybe you can give us some insight into that issue. I know it is something we're paying attention to here on the Penn State campus in our housing and food services, and many of the restaurants are doing the same.
Yeah, the comment you had that they're being funded by the food industry, I don't believe that to be true. In terms of trans fats, if you look on any food label recently, within the past 4 years, 3 years actually maybe, it's been required now that when you look at a label that you can actually look on the back of the food label and see whether there are or not trans fats in the particular food item. Yes, recently New York City has banned all trans fats. Other states have not followed yet, to my understanding, and it is important to look at to consider the amount of trans fats you are consuming. But at this point, in Pennsylvania, there has been no ban on trans fats in the schools or in the home.
Jack from Center Hall, you're with us on the air.
Right.
How you doing?
Fine. Listen, I've been to Cuba many times. And one of my observations is the diet of young, well, primarily younger people, but it's primarily fish and pork, but also lots and lots of fresh vegetables and fruit. And I don't see the sort of morbid obesity that I see here in Pennsylvania amongst lots of younger people. And all politics aside, the people in Cuba are eating well. Primarily, I think it's the diet that they're eating. So I'd like to add that. So
yeah, well, I'm sure we see cultural differences. I think we began the show with the observation that there's an unusual amount of obesity among children in the United States, and it is increasing.
Right.
And studies are showing that if you eat more fruits and vegetables, if you eat more dairy products such as milk, that there's a less chance for obesity in that. So certainly a healthier diet does make a significant difference.
Are there any cultures that you're aware of that just have unusually good practices that we should model?
Well, I think in terms of practices that we can model, the dietary guidelines would be a great practice. Very few people follow the dietary guidelines of, consuming a diet rich in whole grains, consuming, now currently it went from 5 up to 9 a day of the fruits and vegetables, reducing your intake of saturated fats and trans fats. So I think if you want to look somewhere, the first place we should all look would be to the dietary guidelines and trying to meet those recommendations, because very few people are currently meeting those recommendations.
Next we have Lewis from Johnsonburg. Good evening, Lewis. Thanks for calling into our program.
Thank you, Dr. Spanier. My call is about what I found out years ago on the internet. There's been certain cattle ranches out west that had downer cows, and they this is back in the 50s. They injected them with antibiotics, certain antibiotics, and they perked right up. Some of them gained 200-300 pounds of inflammation, water weight, and increased appetite. And I'm wondering if it, well, I heard through research, medical research, that it does affect humans that way, certain ones, with certain antibiotics, and I'd like to hear your panel comment on that.
So you're asking about whether the antibiotics,
certain antibiotics
that are in the animals end up
that way, and
via
also with rare
consumption.
meat, with also with the milk, but also the injections against our own diseases that wouldn't affect our weight gain. I've heard it did. I heard it had in the past, but I'd like to hear their comments on it.
Do we have information about that?
I don't know of any research that has anything to show that there's increase in weight or obesity, even transiently. There are certain medications that we can take that can cause our appetite to go up. The most well-known of that is prednisone or steroids. If you're on significant doses of that, people can gain weight very quickly. And some of the newer drugs that we're giving children for seizures or mood stabilizations, drugs like risperidol and Depakote in some children, can cause significant weight gains in a short period of time. So if you recognize that earlier, then talking to your physicians to say, hey, can we use a different drug that does the same thing but doesn't have this side effect, we sometimes switch, and occasionally when that's the last drug that works, then we have to work around that. But those are the only things that I've been aware of.
And while we're on the topic of drugs, on the flip side, do you use any medications at all in your treatment programs to help children and adolescents lose weight?
I haven't. I think of a lot of these drugs as rented weight loss, because if you haven't changed your behavior, as soon as you stop the medication, everything goes right back to the way it was before. It's just a matter of time. So if you teach good habits of slowly getting toward the right portion size, watching the drinks that you're drinking, and getting more exercise, when you change the behavior, then everything falls in line and will hopefully stay in line because you've made new habits that you're used to, and they will continue on.
Luke from Coudersport, thanks for calling.
Hi, Dr. Spanier.
How are you doing?
I have just an observation as to the current environment compared to a generation ago, namely that from really all forms of media, the world is depicted as a dangerous place, and I think that parents are not inclined to let children ages 5 to 15 go out in the neighborhood and play pickup ball games and things like that. They tell them to stay indoors.
I think that's a good point. I
You're
think
exactly
as
right.
parents become more and more protective. When I was growing up, it was, get out of the house, and I'm not sure they knew where we were all the time. We were out playing ball all the time or something, but now parents really do have their eye on their children much more.
Currently there's a lot of research looking at the walkability of a neighborhood, for example, or the safety of a neighborhood. Some parents are concerned about safety and don't want or don't often encourage their children to go outside. So there's been a push for people to come up with new innovative ways for people to be physically active within the home in those very urban settings, for example.
Even on the Penn State campus, I was on my way to a meeting today, and there seemed to be an unusual traffic jam in the middle of campus, and I counted 9 buses lined up. I thought, well, that's very good service, but there were hundreds of students at the one bus stop jamming the bus to get on just to ride a few blocks at most.
And then also, if you look at the way society was 30 years ago, houses were smaller, not as well insulated, not as many channels on TV, so it was much more desirable to be outside of the house. It was more comfortable. Now the houses are bigger, very well insulated, great temperature control, tons of things for us to do and keep us motivated between computers and videos and TVs, that it's much more desirable now to stay inside. So it's tougher to get the kids to want to go outside and play. And then that behavior goes not only from there, but we want to get as close as we can to go to the mall or the supermarket, so we get there closer. And as you mentioned, urban design, the supermarkets are no longer in the middle of the neighborhood. You're forced to drive to get to these places. So again, there's many, many factors that that have contributed to this.
Reminds me of the story of the father who said to his son, "Why don't we play some baseball now?" And the son said, "Okay, good idea. Let me go get the video cartridge." Jennifer from Bellefonte, you're with us on the air.
Yes, I was wondering what the current recommendation is for how long to breastfeed a child, and does that affect their weight later in life?
Yes, the current recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics is to exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months, at which time between 4 to 6 months when it's developmentally appropriate to transition into solids. Usually it's rice cereals, wheat cereals. And then in addition, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends holding off on offering milk until 1 year of age, and to not offer 100% fruit juice until at least 6 months, and then you're still supposed to only offer at the most 4 to 6 ounces per day. And yes, breastfeeding has been associated with obesity, and specifically there are a lot of benefits to both mom and baby when it comes to breastfeeding. So it helps moms take the weight off after pregnancy by when their body's producing the milk, the energy needed to make that milk helps them to lose the weight. It helps their uterus go back to its original size. And then for the baby, the first primary is the nutrition. It's formulated perfectly in terms of the amino acids and the lactose and the design of the milk in terms of for the babies. And it also is thought to help with self-regulation with intake.
So breastfeeding up to 6 months. You said
yes, 6
begin
months.
Introducing cereals at 4
to 6
now,
months.
What happens between 6 months and a year?
At 6 months to a year, they're still recommended to breastfeed. Obviously, sometimes women choose not to breastfeed, and then they would be formula feeding instead of breastfeeding. And then between 6 months and a year, they would be breastfeeding and beginning to introduce solids. And it's important to make sure you wait until the baby's developmentally ready for that.
And the breastfeeding studies have shown that when children, it helps protect against obesity up till age 6. And once you're at age 6, you have a 50% chance, if you're an obese 6-year-old, to become an obese adult. So if you can cut down the weight for that one, we're cutting down a significant risk for them to be an overweight or an obese adult.
And I think that brings some good points up in terms of, on the prevention side, early on, if you are breastfeeding, that's breast is best is kind of the slang terminology for it. But in terms of the parent feeding practices, we mentioned having nutritious, healthy fruits, vegetables, whole grains in the home. Being a good role model is very important. You yourself eating those fruits and vegetables and whole grains, your baby and infant and toddler is much more likely to. Not pressuring your child to consume certain foods. If you pressure your infant or toddler, if you pressure a toddler to consume healthy foods, in the short run, yes, they may consume those foods, but then they have a potentially learned aversion or decreased preference for those foods. And the flip side with restricting, we mentioned previously, when you restrict kids' intake of those highly palatable, fattening foods, that may also have a counterintuitive effect where they actually desire those foods more.
Mary from State College, you're on the air.
Hi, I was wondering about the nutritional value of locally grown foods versus the conventionally grown foods in the large-scale farming. And with the large Amish population in this area, I was wondering if there's been a noticeable difference in the health between the Amish versus people who eat the conventional foods.
Do we have any information about that?
I believe the nutritional value would be similar, if not the same. In terms of the Amish population, I'm not familiar with that research or studies that have been done within that specific community.
Jeff from State College, you're on the air.
Hi, Dr. Spanier. You had mentioned video games earlier, and I'm wondering if your panel thought that video games that encourage physical activity, such as Dance Dance Revolution or any of the Wii games, are they better than actually going outside and doing some physical activity?
That's an interesting question. I've seen people on the Guitar Hero really moving around like crazy. And Wii,
I'm not familiar. I don't know to date if there's a study that shows that or has tested whether using those games is better than going outside. I know there is a group here at Penn State that is doing some research with the Wii and some of the Dance Dance Revolution, and specifically actually in adolescents. So
does this come up in your treatment programs?
It does. If they have video games, the only ones I really allow are the Dance Dance Revolution ones for the game stations that are not the Wii. For the Wii, I allow them to have that as sort of neutral time. It doesn't count toward their 2 hours of screen time because they are moving. Now they have to be doing some good things, not just hitting the button.
Yeah.
So they have to really be moving, like for the tennis, or the Wii Fit is awesome. They have yoga. They have a whole bunch of energy-burning exercises in there. That's a lot of fun. So I tell them they can do that as much as they want. But you're right, it's not better than going outside and moving, but it's another addition that we can have, especially during this time of the year when it's snowing or it's very cold, that you could do at any time to get some extra activity in.
We did a show on this general topic focused on adults a while back, and the topic of bariatric surgery came up. Can you talk about that in relation to children? Is that something that you ever do or ever recommend with adolescents?
Bariatric surgery is being done in adolescents, and in fact, a few years ago, that was the largest group of population that was getting bariatric surgery were the teens. And there are some children that I see in my practice that are, would be classified as morbidly obese if they were adults, and that they would need some surgery. And I really do restrict that recommendation unless they have significant medical problems, at least 2 or 3 significant medical problems like high blood pressure that's not well controlled, sleep apnea, very high cholesterol, or diabetes that we're not getting down. Then having that surgery can help reduce those and keep it down. And in fact, it's a sad thing that in adults that bariatric surgery is the only thing that's been proven curative to obesity. And none of these other diets have really shown over the long term that they've worked. So there is risk that happens with these surgery, and that's why I'm very cautious in recommending that to teenagers. But you can't really even consider that until they're done reaching their final adult height. So we're talking about age 14 for girls and about age 16 for boys, because otherwise they lose significant amount of weight, and when you're doing that when they're growing, they will stop growing early, and therefore you're going to cut down height. So most of us would not even entertain recommending that until...
And to get into the zone where you would be even talking about it, how obese does one have to be?
We're talking at least having a BMI of greater than 40, which is the adult definition of morbid obesity. They really don't have that in children. But these are really heavy children and adults. And again, those are ones who are not able to get their weight down and not able to comply with some of these things that we've talked about here, and they're still having medical problems that are out of control. And now you're risking, if you don't control those medical problems, we're going to have definite issues here versus the risks of going under anesthesia and possible wound healing problems, et cetera, that can come along with some of these surgeries. But the centers that do them, especially the ones at Penn State, you have to go to a center that's very well recognized. I've referred 4 or 5 children for surgery in their upper teens, and all have refused it because they've had family members who've had the surgery and have had complications. So it's not something that we use very often, and we have not had anybody that's actually gone through it. So we've worked on some of the other methods here to help get their weight down. Surgery truly is a last resort.
And can you describe the surgery? Just our time's limited, but very briefly, what's involved in?
Basically, it's the same gastric bypass that they're doing in adults. The banding process is not approved in children. So basically what they do is they cut your stomach to reform it to be only 2 ounces, a 2-ounce pouch. And then they reroute things so that it drains appropriately. So this way you can't take in more than 2 ounces at a time. And in doing that, you end up having a very restrictive diet, down to around 600 or 800 calories, and you lose a significant amount of weight. In doing that, though, the diabetes gets under control within a week, high blood pressure goes down very quickly, and so does sleep apnea, so the medical problems do reverse, and reverse quickly.
I think the point you made in terms of gastric bypass being the most effective in adults is, again, one of the reasons you would really point towards the importance of prevention and really trying to prevent the onset of childhood obesity, because it is so hard to get that weight off.
Let's end our program, since we just have a little time left, with a tip from each of you for families out there on the theme of prevention. What takeaway would you want them to have?
I think it's really important at the family level, obviously, to have healthy foods in the home, as I mentioned previously, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, to really be positive role models in the home, both the parents and the older siblings, to encourage younger children to eat healthy also.
And Ron?
Drink water, eat in moderation, and be more physically active. I think that's the basis for everybody to stay healthy.
Well, great advice from both of you. Thanks so much. We want to thank our guests, Dr. Ron Williams, Director of Penn State's Children's Hospital Multidisciplinary Weight Loss Program, and Jennifer Savage Williams, Associate Director of Penn State Center for Childhood Obesity Research. And thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us again on Tuesday, February 24th, when our topic will be the business of weather. Tonight's program will be stored in an electronic archive that can be accessed through WPSU.org. This site also links to online resources on tonight's topic. To the Best of My Knowledge is a production of Penn State Public Broadcasting, and for all of us here at WPSU, I'm Graham Spanier. Have a good night.
Presentation of To the Best of My Knowledge on WPSU is made possible in part by support from the Penn State Alumni Association, informing, involving, and inspiring Penn State alumni and students through its publications, programs, and events. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. And from the members of WPSU.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.